This video is sponsored by Wren.
Recently, Brian Johnson, known more famously as the Liver King, shocked and disappointed his fans with the revelation of alleged steroid use. As a personal trainer and athlete, dating a personal trainer and athlete, this was a no-duh moment for both of us. Honestly, the most shocking thing about it was the number of people who were shocked. At least that was my initial reaction before I took a moment to pull my head out of my ass and examine the ominous implications here, which is that a whole lot of people, in this case young men, don't actually know what a roided out body looks like. Because apparently there were enough guys who thought that this is naturally achievable to make this man a multi-millionaire and fund his alleged steroid habit costing upwards of $10,000 a month. For those like me who are bad at math, that's basically a hot bajillion Canadian buckos. All of this speaks to a rising problem that has largely gone unaddressed. Male body dysmorphia. So we're going to talk about it. What it is, where it comes from, and some of the ways that we can adjust our thinking around it. Hi squad, welcome back, and dog bless you. This is one of those topics that's just always kind of been in my periphery, both as a Q-word man and a fitness professional. Where my work is concerned, I think it's important to be informed on these things and be able to recognize potentially dangerous patterns in my clients, because it is very real. And very much not talked about, at least not as much as it should be. And when it does get brought up, it's with the unfortunately high likelihood that it's being used to silence women rather than empower men. Male comic book characters are just as unrealistic, men face unrealistic body standards too, that kind of thing. Which they are. And we do. And we should talk about that outside of the context of silencing other people. That's what's more likely to get them to help support us on those things in the first place, if it's not used as an attack against them. Two bad things can exist at the same time. Recognizing the complexity of problems is a key part in solving them. And now that I've said that, I'm going to use that as a segue into talking about today's sponsor because it very much applies. Because this video is sponsored by Wren, and if complex problems require multi-pronged solutions, Wren is doing it right. Let me get you up to speed. Wren.co is a subscription service that lets you contribute directly to climate action. You do this by calculating your carbon footprint and making a monthly contribution that goes to funding climate solutions, of which there are many under Wren. You get to see your contribution at work on a multitude of projects that combine both hands-on environmental efforts, such as rainforest protection, and policy action that treats problems at their source, like the work being done by the Clean Air Task Force. Wren doesn't just make it easy for you to access information and see what's being accomplished. They actively encourage your involvement with their incredible transparency, budget breakdowns, and monthly updates on the projects that you are helping to fund. You are called in to learn more and take part. I know I'm not alone in this. I'm worried for our planet. This year, the forests near my home have been hit hard by bizarre weather patterns. Fluctuating temperatures have caused flash freezing that has literally snapped trees in half. I took this footage myself, and this is after our salvage efforts. I know Canadian winters can be intense. Trust me, I have decades of experience when it comes to lake effect snow, blizzards, freezing rain, ice storms, flash freeze conditions, but I have never seen anything this bad where damage is concerned. This is weird, and it's been getting noticeably worse in the past few years. Our planet is in trouble. We are in trouble. We need to do something, and we can. You can put your support behind the land stewards, climate experts, and innovators who are leading this charge, and you can do so while finding your footing as part of this growing community of people who are protecting our planet. If you sign up using the link down in the description, you'll get your first month covered by Wren for free, so you can join that community and see what it's all about, because it's going to take a lot to end the climate crisis, and we'll need to work together to make that happen. Consider getting started today. Thank you so much to Wren for the work they're doing and for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it. So, unlike certain other topics, I do understand a certain amount of, let's call it comparative defensiveness on this one. Usually when we're talking about dysmorphia, beauty standards, objectification, and retaliatory body positivity movements, girls and women tend to be at the center of the conversation, and for good reason. But men are often left out, unless they're being blamed. And that's a problem, because the patriarchal constructs that hurt girls and women are also in full swing against boys and men. But again, we fall into that trap of incorrectly viewing patriarchy as by men, for men, and therefore inherently beneficial to men, and this ain't it. More on that in my previous video. This tendency to forget the fellas means that at best there is a downplaying of beauty standards as they impact men, and at worst, men who are struggling with body dysmorphia are left to suffer in silence. And I'm gonna get to my hot take, but first let's run through the facts. Over the past few decades, image insecurity and distress has been on the rise in general. This is due to a number of factors, but the increasing availability of perfect body images being beamed directly into our homes is a pretty big part of it. It started with TV and movies, but now we have supercomputers in our pockets so we can feel bad about ourselves basically any time of day. One American study found that where men are concerned, the number of guys expressing dissatisfaction with their appearances tripled between the late 70s and early 2000s. Take a peek at how the physiques of male models have changed over that time, and a wicked shredded image starts to come into view. Where the past decade is concerned, a fair amount of research has gone into how social media exacerbates this problem. Unsurprisingly, there is a strong link between social media usage and being unhappy with how you look. It's made just about every social media user more aware of their appearance, often to a harmful degree. The excessive preoccupation with one's appearance and perceived flaws is known as body dysmorphic disorder, and it affects just as many men as it does women. And the specific muscle dysmorphia subtype is seen almost exclusively in men. A more recently pinpointed issue, people with muscle dysmorphia end up seeing themselves as small and weak regardless of how big and strong they are. It often goes hand in hand with EDs, text on screen, and use of anabolic steroids. The majority of steroid users are male amateur bodybuilders and recreational weightlifters in their 20s and 30s. Just over 20% of these guys started juicing when they were teenagers. One study found that 6 to 7% of American high school boys have experimented with steroid use. Recreational steroid use in men has been linked to lower self-esteem, higher rates of depression, an increased likelihood of an unaliving attempt, substance abuse, and greater ignorance about health in general, in addition to a number of other problems. A study comparing men that use steroids and men who don't found that guys on juice were more likely to report being SA'd in the past. It is possible that the preoccupation with size and power comes from a place of wanting to be bigger and more intimidating after previously having been victimized. Keep in mind that this is just what we can know. It's likely that rates are even higher than this, but masked by the fact that people don't like to open up about this kind of thing, even anonymously, and that surveys examining drug use don't usually ask about anabolic steroids. Finally, the number of men accessing cosmetic procedures, particularly body contouring, has also been on the rise. Speaking from my own experience as a trans guy, I pushed to masculinize my body both before and in the early days of my transition. I pushed to the point where I was chronically injured and perpetually exhausted, and it became really hard to find the line between my gender dysphoria and my more run-of-the-mill male body dysmorphia. I have even accessed non-surgical body contouring for my hips and low back. For me, this felt like undoing an unwelcome reminder of having gone through the wrong puberty. That is, I had sort of distanced myself from the idea that maybe it was coming from male beauty standards. But during this process, I found out that the treatment I wanted was one of the most commonly accessed by cis men as well. In fact, the technician who assessed me thought that I was in that demographic before I stated otherwise. Kinda got me thinking further. It drove the point home to me that my formerly trans-masculine specific gender dysphoria had overlapped with more general masculine gender dysphoria. And yes, that is what it is. Contrary to popular belief, cis people also seek gender-affirming care. It's why a lot of procedures like this exist for trans people in the first place. The pursuit of the ultimate masculine appearance is one of gender affirmation. Of course, the specifics of what this looks like differs across cultures and subcultures, but in the West, where attitudes tend to be primed with concepts of unlimited growth and domination, the idea of peak masculinity is one of excessive musculature, exaggerated features, and visible power. It is also wildly unattainable, and we are lied to about that fact. I want to open this section by driving home a very important point. While most people have some control over their physical appearance, and pretty much everyone has the ability to become stronger than their own current baseline, different bodies are different. I can teach most people how to hand balance. Depending on their shape, proportions, and physical ability, how they get there and the kind they do will vary. But even those who train my style and my technique specifically aren't going to end up with my physique unless they were already leaning in that direction. They'll end up with a stronger version of their own body, and that is going to be specific to each person. Likewise, I'm never going to be a competitive strongman. Certainly not naturally. Most athletes find their niche based on their body type, not the other way around. I am aware of this, which is why I will never personally use my body to sell fitness. That's not to say I'm not going to show it. I like my body, and I'm not going to pretend that I don't work my ass off. But plenty of people work their asses off and look completely different. Functional muscle is available to just about everyone, but aesthetic muscle is heavily influenced by genetics. A great many fitness influencers, especially guys like Brian Johnson, do not look the way they look because of what they're selling. They are selling what they're selling because of the way they look. And not only is this look often enhanced by steroid use and cosmetic procedures, it is also achieved with a combination of good lighting, flexing hard enough to burst a blood vessel, and severe dehydration. Posing specifically to accentuate muscle is something every single bodybuilder worth their dangerously depleted salt hones as part of their training. And there's a reason why competitors passing out at bodybuilding events is such a common occurrence. occurrence. But I digress. Influencers do all of these things specifically to build their image and therefore sell their brand. And in order to sell a product, you have to have a specific market demographic in mind. People peddling supplements and selling workout plans that are specifically about building muscle and getting stronger are usually targeting teen boys and men. I know this as both a consumer of fitness products and the owner of a training business. You're not looking for them. They are looking for you. Guys like the Liver King don't accidentally end up with an overwhelmingly young male following. They set out to find one, which I'm sure is obvious when it's said out loud. Ain't no one looking at this guy and assuming he's trying to make sales to contortionists or seniors looking to stay on top of their blood pressure. No. He is trying to appeal to young, able-bodied men who want to be bigger, stronger, and more visibly masculine. And he is doing this, allegedly, while perfectly aware of the fact that the body he's selling isn't naturally achievable. This sort of thing is knowingly promoting an impossible goal rooted in common male insecurities. And to add insult to injury, countless guys are literally paying money for it, investing in the perpetuation of their own feelings of inadequacy. It is an unrealistic standard that we are told to believe is attainable. But where does it come from? And who is it for? I'm going to try and answer that question, and I'm hoping that at the very least you'll gain a better understanding of the problem so that you can start to break away from it. But it does require use of yet another term that tends to put a lot of guys on the defensive. So let's take a deep breath, check our feelings, and talk about it. Does that freak you out? Kind of freaks me out. But, you know, I'm going to leave it there. It's a choice. I made a choice and I'm sticking to it. Like patriarchy, the term male gaze tends to get a lot of misunderstanding from a variety of angles. It is not saying all men are guilty of this or this is a problem entirely because of men, so please cast that thinking aside because it is not true or helpful. Put very simply, the male gaze describes a phenomenon wherein the audience or onlooker is assumed to be male. We see this in entertainment, advertising, you name it. Originally, this was used as a way of describing the objectification of women in media, how women are portrayed and how audiences are then conditioned to think about them. But this assumed male audience also means that we get very specific images of what men are supposed to be as well. And it's often a reflection of male desires, not necessarily the saucy kind, calm down. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's accidental, but unless you are actively on the lookout for it, it's kind of hard to tell the difference. But regardless, it tends to be very narrow and unrealistic, especially where social media is concerned. The male gaze, as it applies here, means that the images of men that we see promoted are generally intended for men. In the previous section, we talked about how this can be a targeted effort by individuals, so we know that it exists in that capacity. I want you to ask yourself what the likelihood of it extending beyond that actually is. Regardless of whether or not the images you're being shown are targeted, what are you being told about masculinity and how is it affecting you? Like, even if you don't explicitly care about big beefy dudes, do you think having them pop up on your feed while you're scrolling might have some kind of effect on your brain that you're not aware of? A lot of what men see in various advertisements and entertainment assume that we are the primary audience, but that doesn't necessarily mean that what we're being shown is intended to help us. More often, we're being shown things that will be profitable to whoever's trying to snag our attention. How it impacts us psychologically isn't considered, because it doesn't matter as long as the bottom line is topped. Men are continuously shown these images because they work. We engage and we listen. I have seen more than a few straight dudes claim that these peak male image pressures come primarily from women, but fellas, women aren't the people clicking on this stuff. I know there are exceptions, but I promise you they're just that. I think a lot of straight guys chasing this hypermasculine image assume women like it or want to believe that they do because they're struggling with how to justify their own desire to look that way. That is, struggling to articulate the fact that this pursuit is based on their own standards of masculinity, the opinions of other guys, or both. Speaking from my own experience, when I was early in my transition, I put a lot of perceived pressure from women on myself to look a certain way and achieve a certain level of masculinity before realizing that it wasn't actually coming from that. I was just displacing my own standards. And those standards came from insecurity. It's the male gaze. It is men performing for men based on the expectations and standards of men. We gotta ask ourselves how we've internalized physical standards of masculinity, whether or not they're actually realistic, and who they are actually for. This is important both for our own self-concepts and relationships with ourselves, and because guys like the Liver King are out here ready and willing to exploit our feelings of inadequacy and lie to us for profit. And of all the things to shill, raw liver? Like, really, Mr. Johnson? Who hurt you and why do you hate us so much? Now, it's important to acknowledge here that many of the guys doing this are themselves victims of this same insecurity that I am describing, but they are acting from that angle to appeal to and therefore exploit other guys who are struggling. It is predatory. And if insecure men are both the product originators and the target demographic, when you strive to embody what they're teaching, who are you then appealing to? Who's your audience? Hopefully you see what I'm getting at. Even if we were to grant this unsubstantiated idea that this unattainable male image is what's appealing to women, it still comes from the idea that appealing to women specifically means being better than other men. Regardless of sexuality, a hypermasculine image is a way of signaling power and status to other guys. You're supposed to want a body that flaunts the ability to dominate, because patriarchy teaches us to be in competition with one another. If you've ever heard somebody describe the Western ideal male physique as a male power fantasy, this is what they're talking about. Forget being your best. Forget what makes you happy. Just be bigger, better, and stronger than the other guys. That's how self-improvement works, right? The figures pushing this image of masculinity while insisting that they're about male self-improvement and wellness are completely full of shit, and they know it. You can't claim that you're about the liberation and empowerment of men while completely erasing and belittling small men, fat men, senior men, disabled men, chronically ill men, or any guy who doesn't embody power and dominance in his physique. And you certainly can't make that claim while sowing seeds of insecurity so that you can profit off the harvest. And before anyone starts, no, I am not saying that the female gaze is never a thing. Of course, media can be and has been made with a female audience in mind. And women are not exempt from feeding the problem of unrealistic beauty standards regardless of gender. But when it comes to musculature and body image in particular, the places the algorithm takes us, the patterns of engagement, do not go back to a female audience. And there's a subset of men that we can look at to see just how much the standards and interests of men are at the core of this phenomenon. And that is the male gaze. The other kind, gay men. Straight dudes in the audience, please stay put. Don't be that guy who thinks that information isn't relevant to you just because you're not at the center of it. This is a more general men's issue. And gay men are men. Plus, getting right down to it, do you think that maybe a group of men specifically concerned with embodying the physical interests of men is a useful population to look at when it comes to examining what the physical interests of men might be? We literally have an entire population of dudes who don't care about being physically or romantically appealing to women, and you don't think that maybe, just maybe, that might be a useful population to look at when it comes to men's perceptions of our own desirability?
That is the most illogical attitude.
There's a lot that we could go over here, but I think it's important for the purpose of today's discussion to share that gay men are more likely to suffer from body dissatisfaction and dysmorphia than straight men, which is obviously due to a number of interacting factors, but it does kind of throw a wrench into the idea that male body image issues go back to a female gaze. If there was a cultural female gaze at play, men who by their own interest would be exempt would probably struggle less with these pressures rather than more. And that's not what we see. And let me tell you, that's a whole thing. As a formerly closeted trans man who has experienced both female and male beauty standards, and a bisexual man who has courted more than one gender as more than one gender, by golly, there is a lot to unwind. I sincerely thought that transitioning would alleviate some of the male gaze pressures in the dating game, but no. No, it did not. They are still there. Same but different. That's a story for another day. Here, I thought I had felt all angles of the male gaze, but experiencing it as a man, well, I'm not one to shy away from admitting when I'm wrong. When I transitioned, the pressure to meet male interest was suddenly joined by the pressure to command male respect. A push to be both an object of desire as somebody who dates men, and a subject of envy as someone who is one. Under patriarchal masculinity, I think all of us experience the latter at some point to some extent. And a really sad number of us are pushed to destructive extremes to try and achieve it. We leave a lot of our crew behind, and we hurt ourselves in the process. It's lose-lose. Maybe none of this applies to you. But having been on multiple sides of this issue, I wanted to offer my experience in case you are currently working through those feelings and struggling with that pressure. Because we're all performing gender to some extent. And if you've been feeling unsuccessful in that effort, it might be worthwhile to question the standards and methods before you declare yourself a failure. I wanted to talk about this because I think in a lot of ways the ideal male body that we're told to aspire to is a physical representation of a lot of the destructive behaviors men learn under patriarchy. Dominance, aggression, excess. It is narrow and unachievable for the vast majority of men, which doesn't make them lesser men. This is how patriarchy objectifies men, how we objectify each other, how cultural forces set us up for exclusion, failure, and mental health struggles. This time by catering to our insecurities, pitting us against one another, and claiming that these very things are what make us men. If you don't already embody the ultimate masculine power fantasy, you at least better be struggling to get there. But it's kind of foolish to hurt yourself trying to fill out a suit when you could just tailor it to fit you better. To give you something actionable, if you are struggling with these feelings, really ask yourself where they're coming from, and whether or not there might be a way to limit your exposure to media that makes you feel worse. If you're a gym goer, which I think is great, look at the culture of your training space. What images are promoted? What does success in that particular space look like? And does it make you feel motivated or self-conscious? Because you can train elsewhere. And if options are limited, it's arguably better to spend your membership money on equipment for training at home where you can do so on your own terms. And finally, when Abs McKenzie pops up on your feed to start trying to sell you stuff, ask yourself two things. Namely, whether or not what he's selling is realistic, and whether or not he deserves your support. Because a lot of these guys are out there trying to build their market by sending the message that they are there to support you when it is very much the other way around. The topic of body dysmorphia and body image issues is obviously very complicated, which is why for this video I just wanted to focus on muscle dysmorphia and power signaling specifically. I will talk further about attraction and other aspects of body image at some point, so if it feels like I missed anything, it'll probably get covered there, but feel free to point it out in the comments. I also need to stress that I'm not completely dismissing online coaches. I am one, and I'm personally a big Jeff Nippard fan. This is both due to his expertise and the fact that he talks about genetic differences and doesn't shame or swindle people. But there's a line between experts who actually know what they're talking about and influencers who are trying to sell you something. And that line can get a little bit blurry sometimes. So be careful. Ask questions, and look after each other. I've included just a few of my personal favorite fitness resources in the description of this video, so if that's of interest to you, go ahead and check them out. But that is it for me for now. I will see you next time, and as always, thanks for watching.